Thank you. So I'm Jared Robinson. I work for Vivint. Been there since July of last year. My history is that I've been doing C++ and Java development with some Perl and a lot of Linux for the past a long time. And so I came to Vivint. We do Python there. I've never really done Python other than maintaining code in Python now and again. But when I arrived, they had been coding like crazy since January 1st of 2013 to try to bring up a brand new backend. And they had a whole slew of servers. Most of them were clones of other machines that they had made, which worked fine. But when we needed to install new software, it meant we had to go to every single machine, install the same software. Things were different in configuration between every machine, so we needed something. And my long-term job and my long-term goal in life is not necessarily to be an operations person, but that's what they needed at the time. So I had to pick something. And Salt was the newest thing on the block. Did some Google searches, found out that it was supposed to be better than some of these competitors like Puppet. And Chef, I think, is the other one I read about. It had an active development community. It seemed really cool. And it was written in Python, which was our preferred language at the time. Now,
so what's your preferred language now?
My preferred language right now is Python, or Bash.
At Vivint, though.
Well, Vivint is, for our team, is Python. There are some teams that use .NET.
Say hi to Eric Harrison.
OK. He's the one that got me hired. So when I look into a project, I like to know why I might not want to use it. So I thought I'd throw some counterindications up here. If you're already using something you're happy with, that might be a reason not to use it. Now, last night, I learned out that Salt integrates really well with Puppet and other configuration management tools. It's really easy to do that. So you can use Salt to configure and control Puppet. If YAML's not your thing or Python's not your thing, it might not be for you. You don't have to delve into Python, but the configuration here, it fits really well with Python. It's really easy to take the YAML files that you'll see and find the code, and I may show that to you. When I first started with this, I started with release 16, I think it was a .16, and it didn't work very well on CentOS. There was always problems with things, so I had to fix it every single release. Lately, it's been a lot better. So if you don't like fixing things, it might not be for you either, although it's been a lot more robust. And I think it's because they may have added a test suite in the past year or so. So we're going to cover various things.
When you say fix it, did you have to push things back up?
I did push things back up once. Other than that, mostly I just waited for other people to fix it because I'm lazy and I had lots to do. So
there is a test suite that is run for each check-in, and things are much more stable.
It does seem more stable lately. So we're going to cover these things on the board. If you have other questions you want to have answered at the end, that's fine. You can break in. I don't know everything about Salt. I'm still learning. I'm not an expert. But I think it's cool, so here I am. So the easiest way to get installed on your operating system of choice is to follow their documentation. Or, since I'm focusing on CentOS, this is what I do. But I don't like to type this in every time. So what I do instead is I've got a script that I've written. And I'll show the script I've got up here on my screen. I wrote the script a while ago because I didn't want it to install if the Salt master wasn't listening. So Bash has some really cool, at least if it's compiled with that option, it has some cool stuff. You can check to see if TCP ports are open on the server. You don't have to even have netcat. So that's what these things do. So what we'll do over here is we're going to run my script and expect you to give it the Salt master. Now, a best practice when you're doing Salt is to configure a DNS name called Salt, and then you don't have to configure anything on the minion. In my case, I don't have DNS set up that way, so I'm going to use my IP address of my Salt master over here. I'm going to take that, and I'm just going to use an IP address directly because who cares about whether or not we have robust DNS over here? Oh, wrong machine. So we're going to do something like something that's completely bogus. So my script says, hey, is it listening? And it's going to fail. I don't know how long it's going to take to time out, but at least it does that for me. Let's paste that in. So it checked to make sure it's listening. It's retrieving the Enterprise Linux Extras repository for CentOS and installing that package repository. And then it's going to say, hey, go and install the minion for me. Is this going to work? Seems very slow to me.
You on wireless?
I am on wireless. Fortunately, I've already installed it on 2 other machines. Now, oh, there we go. One thing I found out the hard way is that the Enterprise Linux Extra, it comes from the testing repository. So it enables that. The testing repository only contains the current version of Salt. And where I have a Salt master that I don't necessarily want to upgrade at any given time, I like to have the same version of the Salt minion as the Salt master so that they match up well. And at one point, I didn't keep the RPMs around. So I recommend that you do a yum downloader of that kind of stuff. Download all 3 packages so that you'll have them later. And that way, anytime you add a new minion, you can get a matching version. Because finding matching RPMs once they're gone is a little bit difficult. Another option that I learned about last night is that the SaltStack people have enterprise support. And so that could be a solution as well. So I've already downloaded the RPMs, and we've got it installed anyway, so we're good. So let's see what was the next step. Yes. So once we've installed the minion, we've got to accept the key up on the master. Now, Salt key, you can do a -L to list all the keys, but there's a shortcut. You can just say Salt key. And it shows me, can everybody see that, or do I need to scroll up a little bit? I've got accepted keys and unaccepted keys. By default, these keys are the names of the machines. You can change that at the time that your minion generates its key. It can be named anything you want. But it's really nice to have it be the same as the host name. So I'm going to do salt -key. Learned about this yesterday, too. You can look at the key fingerprints if you want. I'm going to do a -A, or I can do a -a and the name of the minion key. -A says accept everything, and then it asks me if I really want to do that, and I do. So now I can do a ping. I'm going to see whether or not my minions are all talking to me or not. Looks like app 1 isn't. Sometimes things will break in Salt. You won't know why. It's really good to go look at the logs. So what it does is it starts up. It's going to try to talk to the master every 10 seconds. And I think it stops after a while. That's my experience. So I don't even know if it's running right now. It is. Oh, there we go. So we've got it all installed and running, so we're good there. One thing I like to do is I like to install custom grains on my minions. So Salt has 2 concepts, and I'll talk about these a little bit more later and why they're useful. But we've got pillars and we've got grains, and grains are identifying pieces of information. And by default, you're going to get several grains for your minion. We'll go look at those. Salt. So the minion puts these grains in. It tells us the major release, tells us the OS type is going to be RHEL, and CentOS, and things like that. So, there we go. OS family is Red Hat. But I want to define some of my own. Why is this useful? It's because I want to be able to target grains. So for example, before I go and add the grains, let me just show you this. I think this is really cool. So we can do salt. So what I'm saying is I'm saying, hey, Salt, I want to target every single minion that has a grain called roles MongoDB and go run this command on it. And so I can have 500 machines, and I'll do that to every single one of them. Yes?
Are you familiar with Factor and how this compares to that?
No. Okay. One thing that I said in my presentation title is I am untainted by other systems, and it's true. I don't know anything about those other remote execution frameworks or configuration management systems. So we're going to set up some custom grains for this app server. So I've already put these in my root directory. We'll just copy these in. So I have to restart the minion to get this to take effect, I believe. I don't think there's a reload for that.
You can do a set val from the master.
Yeah, so I learned about that last night. There's also other grain things, so you can say, hey, get or set this hash. This didn't work for me, but let's try set val. See if that works. And that should store it down on the minion, if it ever comes back to me. And normally this is really fast. I think I just have some DNS issues running inside of VMs here. So there's different ways of targeting minions for commands. We can target based on the grains that are on the OS. We can target based on the name. We can do wildcarding. I could say something like with us, we have things in a certain data center, and everything in the data center is prefixed with a certain name. And so we can say, I could say salt space data center \* and go run this command. So it would do everything in that data center. You can do it by pillars and by other cool stuff. Pillars are a lot like grains, but they're set on the master, and they're sent down to the minions.
They are. Just facts.
Yeah, it's YAML configuration. You can do, just facts. So you can do things like license keys for your monitoring agents. We use New Relic. That's how we push up license keys for our test servers versus our non-test servers, our production servers. So this came back. So I should be able to come over here and look at the grains file. And it looks like it added my hello world right there. So I want to target everything by my environment of development. So there we go. Everything that's in a development environment, I can go run a command on that. So we can do things like that with grains. Let's go back to my presentation. This second to last bullet item is your friend. If you're going to do sys.doc on 1,000 minions, you're going to get more than you wanted. You probably want to run that on a single minion to see what it can do. All of our minions are the same, so it's going to return the same documentation for every type. I imagine if you're running one on BSD, it would be different slightly than the ones for CentOS. So let's do one for disk percent. And there we go. That was nice and fast. So I run that documentation command, saved it to a file called doc.txt. Here's every single thing I can run from the command line with examples of the arguments. And so if I want to know what I can do with commands, looks like I can say, hey, does it have the cat command? Well, let's try that. What was it? Command, what was it? Has. Looks like I have it. Looks like I don't. Let's do some more. So let's install Vim Enhanced on every single minion that I've got here. Let's see if I can copy and paste without going to the next slide. Maybe. No, didn't work. So install this code because it abstracts away the package management from you. It does not abstract away the names of the packages. But if I was running on CentOS and Fedora and Debian, and if they're all named Vim Enhanced, it would install it on all those different OSs. It would just figure out how to do it.
You can actually alias packages so that you can say install Vim Enhanced if you really want that, and it'll find the different Vim Enhanced for Debian and Fedora or whatever if you've stuck the alias in there.
Okay, I don't know anything about aliases, but I'll be sure to look into that at some point in the future. Right now we're on CentOS, so what works on one machine works on all machines. That may change in the future. Sometimes we need to change configuration files. This may not be the best idea in the world. I don't know what Salt's going to do with the user permissions once it does this. It could be that it'll change it to be root. But let's give it a try.
No. Yeah. Live on the edge.
Do not try this at home.
So that can be dangerous. So with great power comes great danger. But this is one that we used just last week to change something in production. That was fun. One of the things that I think is really cool, so sometimes I want to run a script on every single minion that I've got. How do I get that script out there? Well, if I can get this without switching to the next slide. I'm going to create a script. One thing I didn't mention before is that Salt by default stores its file system in /srv. I'll show you that in just a minute, but we're going to create a script in srv. And then when we try to go and run a command on the minions, if they know how to use file paths from the Salt, it'll go and download that file and then run it. You can use HTTP stuff too, so it can download it off the internet. So here we go. So I've named my data center Mercury. We're going to run everything in this script on everywhere in Mercury. And there's my script. It's going to grab it from the Salt repository. It's going to go look in /srv/salt by default. Once myscript.sh. The working directory is going to be /var. We're going to run it as nobody. The timeout's going to be 15 seconds. There we go. Simple as that. So the documentation doesn't always have all the parameters that are available. I'm going to switch to my other view here. Let's see if I can find it. Sometimes I want to know what the arguments are to these functions. So every single time I do something like command.script, this refers to a Python file called command.py. And there's a function there called script. And then everything that I give to that is an argument. Well, I didn't know where command.py was, but I'm very fond of locate. Let's see if I have another terminal window that we can blow up here. Find everything on my system, look for things that are part of Salt, and there's cmd.py. That's where I got this from. So these are all the different arguments that were there. That's how I found out we could run it as a certain user, because I didn't know that by default. And so the possibilities are endless here. There's a ton of stuff people have added. The capabilities of the command line have increased. Salt has commands that you can run on the command line. It also has modules. And these commands on the command line just call into the modules for the most part. So if there's not something that's not available, you can probably go and add it fairly easily. I won't cover that. I can tell you how afterwards. I learned about it just last night. There's some maintenance stuff up on the Salt master. When we run a Salt job on all of our minions, it can take a while to come back. If I hit Control-C, the jobs keep running, because this is asynchronous. It sent those commands off to the minions. They're going to do it. They're going to come back and send the information back to the master. And the master, when I do a command run, it's just going to wait for that output to come back for a while. If I hit Control-C, it stops waiting. But I can look that up. It tells me very helpfully how I want to do that. It's not done yet. There we go. It finished. So we can look at the list of active jobs and the ones that have come in the past. I'm not sure how big its cache is, but if I've been doing something and I want to see the result of something that came before, I can go back and I can look up that job ID. Whoops. There's my old result. I think that's really cool. We can see which minions are active. I don't know what jobs are active. Oh, it's manage.status and manage.down. That can be helpful when you're trying to do maintenance or when you're trying to figure out what's going on. I like doing a test.ping, which we did earlier. That's my favorite way. But my guess is it takes a lot less effort to do the salt run thing. At least it doesn't have to send the command out. I can tell what versions all my minions are with this. You can also do that instead of test.ping, you can do test.version. Whoops.
The latency with that keyboard. No.
There we go.
It's only funny because we've all done that.
The more people that are watching, the worse you get.
That's right.
So you said a minute ago, if you cancel out, it's just not going to keep waiting to listen to the response. Is there a way to tell all the minions to stop doing the job that you just sent?
I don't know. Does anyone know the answer? We've got SaltStack people in here.
No, you said it's asynchronous. So
It is asynchronous.
Does that mean that it'll just send those commands? And
It does. I guess the question is, can you kill the job on the minions? And I don't know the answer to that.
I have to get a list of jobs running on the minions.
Yeah, maybe.
See the PID, so
You can see the PID. So it's a good question. I don't know the answer.
just don't mess up.
Okay, so we've looked at the remote execution stuff. Now we're going to look at the states. Just simple example here. So let's go to my /srv directory. So we got two branches from the top level. There's pillar and salt. My state files are going to be stored in the salt branch, and we'll look at pillar in a little bit. So in most of our salt files, we start with a name. And this can be anything. I could call this goober ntp if I wanted to. And then we say what we want to do, package.install. Package is the name of the salt state that we're going to call. There's actually a salt state called pkg.py. It has a function called installed. You can give it arguments if you want. I didn't do any. What it's going to do is it's going to take this name up here, and it's going to say, oh, you want that name installed. Now, it turns out that I can do this too. I can, I think it's this. I can say, hey, the actual name of the thing I want is called NTP instead of goober NTP. Just an interesting side note there. If you have more than one thing, name the same thing in your state file. You need to separate them out, but still operate on the right thing. For the package, you can do it this way. So I want NTP to be installed. I want to manage my ntp.conf file. So we say file.managed. Source comes from my salt server. There's ntp-client.conf. That's what I called it. It's going to rename it to ntp.conf on the minions. And by the way, we require the NTP package to be installed first. And then I say, hey, I want the service to be running. As I understand it, I can combine all this stuff. Let's try it. I could put this like this. All is one, but Salt does things in order. They added that feature a little while ago. So what I really wanted, it's not responding to me at the moment. Oh, there we go. I want it to happen in this order. I want my NTP conf to be there before it starts up the service. And I put a watch in there too. Anytime my ntp.conf file changes, and when I say anytime it changes, I mean anytime Salt changes it, then I want it to do something with the service, probably to restart it. That's the default behavior. You can tell it that you want it to reload instead of to restart. We do that sometimes at stuff we have. So let's watch that happen. Salt, let's do app 1. And there's a couple ways of running this state. I haven't shown you that yet, though. So we'll do this one first. So state or salt app 1 state.sls ntp. And it knows it's going to go look in /serve/salt to look for ntp.sls. And it's going to go ahead and apply that on that minion. Of course, we have slow Wi-Fi. Let's not wait for it. I don't want to wait around for it to do its thing. We can come back to that in a minute. Another thing that we like to do at work is we like to do a test equals true. So it's really dangerous to apply a state to a minion sometimes, especially if you do state.highState. We do a lot of state.highState. And so there's another way of doing this. So I'm going to show you that and why we use test equals true. So there's a top.sls file in here. And in top.sls, I can define what state files are going to be applied to which minions using matching. So I can use globbing. And I say, hey, for every minion, I'm going to use my users.sls, default packages.sls, NTP. And for this data center, we're going to set up the DNS using this SLS file and so forth. And if you do that, we can do something like this. We can do salt. We can do star, or we can just do a single minion, Mongo state.highState. Now, it's possible that it's going to do something that I don't want it to do. Maybe one of the developers came along and changed some configuration file. I'm going to wipe it out if I do this. I want to make sure that it's okay. It's a good question. So I think the idea of a high state is in electronics you have a low voltage and a high voltage, and you apply the high voltage and it does something. It flips from 0 to 1. It's applied versus not applied versus applied. That's what I think. Does anyone else know? So we say test equals true because I want to see what it's going to do before I do it. This is a little bit different than doing high state because more of my states are going to fail if they haven't already been applied. So for example, I might say, hey, install this package, and then once I have that package installed, I have a dependency that says, now go put this file in place. It's a configuration file. If I'm doing a test, it's not going to install the package in the first place, which means the second state is going to fail as well, and you'll see that colorized here. It's possible to change your minions in its minion configuration so that test is always set to be true. And then in here, we'd have to say test equals false in order to make it actually do it on the minions. OK, so that took a while. And it can be slow. So when you do a high state, it's going to do everything that's defined for that minion. And that might be great the first time you're setting up a machine. But you might not want to wait that long. And so this state.sls, I can identify exactly which state file I want to go and apply to that minion. It's a lot faster. So here's the output of that job that I didn't wait for the last time. So it installed NTP. Looks like I already had it. Maybe. No, I didn't have an old version, so it did install it. Shows me my comp file. So the package installed its own comp file. Here's what I changed. I added more servers. Got rid of a bunch of stuff. Any questions about that before I move on to pillars? So we're going to do a slightly more complicated example. I said earlier that we have two branches to our server repository. We've got the salt branch and we've got the pillar branch. We'll go look at the pillars now. So over in pillars, we have a top.sls as well. And you can match which pillars of information are going to go to which minions this way. So let's look at one of them. So these are YAML files as well. I've defined all the users that I'm going to go through. And so this is nice. I can push this down to my minions. It's going to be there, but it doesn't do any useful thing by itself. We can look at what pillars are on a minion. We can do salt, Mongo. We can look at every single pillar that's down there. It looks like my users' pillars have already been pushed. Anytime you do a high state, it's going to push these pillars down to the minion as well. Although there are commands to push it without doing a high state. So there's all the users that I'm going to be pushing down to that machine. Let's go look at...
Do the child machines check back with the master automatically? Or is it always push from the master to the children?
Do child machines...
Minions?
Or do minions check to see if there's new pillars from the master?
Pillars or new data they should...
Or new data. I don't think they do that by default. You can set up a cron job or a schedule so that they can go and grab that stuff. Most of the time, they're just sitting there, and they're just waiting for messages to come in from the master. And the way the communication works between a master and a minion is the minions establish their communication with the master. If you want the slides, by the way, go to jaredrobinson.com/salt, and you'll see them all there. I have notes that explain some other things about setting this up because I skipped over some of the things. I set up my salt so that it runs as a non-privileged user on the master. I set up IP tables so it would allow the incoming minion connections, and that's in the notes on the slide deck. So we're going to look at users.sls. So this is my pillar data. And now we're going to go look at the SLS file that applies that. So this isn't real pretty looking, but well, I should probably start with this. No. State files are interpreted by default. So what that means is that they have a templating language called Jinja. They also have some other ones called Mako, and I can't remember what else. I've used the Jinja one. And so state files are interpreted by Jinja. If you have Jinja in there, it's going to look through that stuff. And so what I'm doing here is I say, for every single variable that's in a pillar data called users, and we saw that was set up down here, we're going to loop through that list. And then we're going to say, hey, if it has a username defined, then we're going to make sure the user's present. And so that's just going to call into a Salt state module called user, call the function present with these arguments. Now the password is the encrypted form, so you can't pass raw passwords down. You've got to pull that out of your etc shadow file first. And then it's going to set up the groups. And so why would I do this? Why would I not create a user for every user? Well, it turns out that you might want to go and stuff the public key in some other user's file. It could be that I want to loop through and put every single user's key in an authorized key file for a certain deployment user, for example. So I'm looping through for a second time saying, hey, for every user that's in there, if they have a public key defined, I'm going to go and put that in their authorized key file. We've got to make sure that the user's present first, and the user's been created first. Another thing that I have to do with CentOS is it enables SE Linux by default. And if you just go and create an authorized key file or modify it, SSH isn't going to let you log in. And so what I do is, remember we said that the minion defines various grains, including what OS family it's on. If it's a Red Hat system, then I'm going to go run this restore condition, or this command to go and make it so that SE Linux will allow SSH to read the authorized key file so that users can log in. And we're using the command wait thing, and here's the actual command we're going to run. And it's going to do that. It has a watch on the authorized key, on this name. So it's going to be something like Nefario_auth. Well, where is Nefario_auth? It's right up here. Nefario_auth. So anytime that key changes, it's going to go run this restore command to restore the SE Linux context. And it won't do that on an Ubuntu system. What else do I want to show you here? Oh, let's do that. So my Mongo machine and my Rabbit machine, I already ran high state on those yesterday. This app server is the first time it's had a minion on it, so it'll do more stuff. I don't know why if this is slow because of my DNS issues or if it's slow because I'm running in a VM. Seems like it's slower than it usually should be. Oh, there we go. What in the world? Oh, I went way too far. Okay. Created a user called Nefario. Made sure that the authorized keys were present in its file, and ran that command to restore the SE Linux context. So if that all worked right, I should be able to log in as Nefario over on that machine. Looks like it worked. Now, my disclaimer in my presentation is that that's probably not the best way to manage users and groups on a machine. There's better tools for that, like, I don't know, YP or LDAP or things like that. But this is an iterative solution we used on our app servers to get us where we needed to be. And we will transition later. So that shows pillars and grains a little bit. Any questions about that? Okay. If you want the stuff that I gave you, there's this link right here on slide, I think it's 12, that you can download all those state files that I just used.
Hey, Jared?
Yeah.
We've got Dave Boucher from SaltStack, who's one of the 4 devs at SaltStack. I know there's a couple questions that I think get answered, like killing a process.
Oh, yeah. So one of the questions from earlier was, says we have this asynchronous nature of Salt. We start a job. Is there a way to kill the job on the minions before it's finished?
Yeah, so if you run the job, if you add a dash D to it, it'll return the job ID. So every job that goes out gets a job ID from the master. So you can take that job ID and then run, say you want a specific minion to stop running a job. So you solve that minion ID, and I think solve util.kill job, and then the minion ID. It'll go out and it'll kill that job right there. And if you're using Salt programmatically, you can get that job ID also within your Python as well.
Okay. Thank you. So one of the tricky parts of having a Salt deployment is upgrading Salt. As I mentioned once before, we had all these minions and a master. We installed some brand new machines. They got newer versions of the minion. I hadn't downloaded the RPMs. I could do things like test.ping. I could run commands. But my Salt states didn't work anymore. And I couldn't find the RPMs for the old version I was using. So I forced an upgrade on me. And this is what I did to make it work. First thing I did was I installed the @ command on all my minions. I enabled the service, started the service. Enable means make sure it runs at runtime anytime you reboot the server. And then I said, hey, let's upgrade the minion on every machine. Goes out to the EPEL repository, grabs the latest minion. Oh, by the way, I upgraded my Salt master before I did this. And fortunately, command.run still worked on the older versions. And then I used @ to go and restart the minion 5 minutes later. The problem is if you said, hey, command.run, restart the minion right now, I think it's running underneath Salt. And if you kill Salt, it could kill the job. You don't get upgraded. You're in a bad state. So we use @ to delay the restart. That's what we did. Now, if you need help on Salt, there's some great things online. I used IRC initially a lot. I haven't had as much time to play with Salt and learn new things lately, but the IRC channel is fairly helpful. Seems like they're online from about 9 to 5 or 6, mostly every day. Your mileage may vary at other times of day.
Jared, you said several times, I learned that just last night. What did you do last night?
So they had a meetup here. It was supposed to be a hackathon, but Tom Hatch, who created Salt, came, and he ended up giving more of an off-the-cuff presentation about everything that we wanted to know and anything else. So it was quite interesting that way.
And you said all the presentation stuff is at jaredrobinson.com/salt.
Yes, it is.
What's the Salt footprint?
What is the footprint of Salt?
0.
There is a footprint.
No, there is no footprint in some modes.
So yes, we learned last night that if you use Salt SSH, which is something that didn't exist when I started using it, you can control a minion without installing the minion on there. It's going to be slower, but there is no footprint in that case.
Because you're using SSH exec.
Yeah. What did you say?
It runs on a Raspberry Pi just fine. So I run Raspberry Pi on my
Okay. So it runs fine on minimal things like Raspberry Pi.
That's
Right.
with the full minion running. Yeah. It's pretty lightweight.
So you were monitoring a config file to notify when something had changed? What's that?
In my SLS file?
Yeah.
Let's see if I can pull that up.
How often does that check? Does it have any CPU?
So when I said watch this other thing, what it's really doing is when I say, hey, go and apply this state, it says, hey, if this other state changed it, then I'm going to do this thing. It doesn't monitor it all the time. That's a common misunderstanding that I've seen before. So if somebody just logs in as root and they go change some config file, Salt's not monitoring that to see what changed. It's really if Salt changes it, then it'll do this thing. You guys saw how easy it was to install a package. One of the things I encountered once is one of our developers said, hey, one of the deployment steps here is you need to go and install this package on every single machine. And I said, why don't you just add that to Salt? And he said, well, that's hard, isn't it? And I said, no, it's like 3 lines of code. And so we just went and did it. And he was extremely happy. People are adding all kinds of things to Salt all the time. So you can configure system control knobs. This is important to us because we have inbound network stack servers. They service a lot of clients. We want to tune those knobs. It's really easy with SaltStack to do that. They have a state module that does that. You can write your own if you want to. So as a recap, I think Salt is awesome, not just because it's useful, not just because it's awesome, but because they have this super awesome, vibrant development community. They've got all kinds of stuff in the pipeline. They've got an eventing framework that I haven't even looked at yet, so that at some point in the future, we can do stuff on our build server like have a Salt minion, and when the build completes successfully, we can say, hey, master, I've completed completely successfully, and the master can say, hey, I'm going to go and deploy that out to this environment. That would be super awesome. They're doing a brand new communications protocol. They use 0MQ right now, but they're writing a new one, and it's supposed to be even faster. 0MQ is not going away, and it will still be the default, but this is the kind of thing that makes me excited about SaltStack. You can manage other configuration management systems in less lines of code than it is just to use Salt. But I think the short thing I'd like to say about Salt is if you're using something else that's more complicated, stop it and use Salt. Any other questions? Thanks, everyone, for coming.